So that was electrifying, wasn't it? She's left us with more energy than before, I think. And I don't want to lessen it. So can I ask Mr. Jinan to make some observations and comments, please?
Actually, I think we are being too naive, not really understanding what modern education is all about. It is fundamentally about creating clones. Because the knowledge today, if you look at any university education that is happening, it is primarily to control people, and it's about patenting knowledge which will liberate us. Whichever there is a possibility of controlling, that kind of knowledge is what is promoted. It's very clear. If you look at, I was studying census, and I found that most Western universities who are studying census is studying census to see how to control you, how to make you eat this, how to make you eat that. The whole anthropological education is that, Yeah. So it's, I think, very naive on our part even to think that this modern education is going to liberate anybody. Having said that, that is the fundamental politics of knowledge. That how knowledge is used to control people and control people's mind. So that's number one. Second thing is that, when, especially what you pointed out about this disconnect between the research and its result coming into the educational scenario, it's a very, very interesting kind of thing, that the research on how children learn came not from educational departments, but from artificial intelligence departments. Because they were interested in creating artificial intelligence. And even today, after almost 30 years or 40 years, this has not been percolated into educational departments. Because the moment you really understand what true cognition is all about, you may not need teachers and schools. This is a tragedy. Then what will teachers do? Now, another thing that I want to point out is that within 10 years in this country, there will not be any farmer left. So I think we need to even look at whether we should be teaching videography, films, or we should actually look at fundamental aspects of our living. That should we begin to cultivate? How should we? See, America is the best example to see how you can de-skill people, how you can control people. You can convince them, if you want to control people, convince them that they are free and control them at their being level. It's a very interesting thing. They think they are free, but they are the most bound people on this earth. They are completely unskilled. No farming. Nobody knows about farm. Nobody knows about cooking. Nobody knows about how to even give birth. Forget about everything else. That if you want to give milk, you have to phone up and ask the doctor, how many times should I give? How many times should I, So this absurd, even a biological sensibility has been lost to people. So I think, this is actually, we are actually in a huge crisis. This is what I feel. Education and the crisis has been created precisely by education. Knowledge is the crisis today. And I also think that if anybody thinks that they have solutions, it's actually, again, going to be a grand failure. I think we have to accept that none of us know. We are in a great mess. And I think we need to relook at this whole thing in a, completely different.
So why don't you just briefly touch upon the experiments that you have done and the success that you...
Yeah. No, there are no successes. Okay. I would like to say that, I studied design. And when I studied design, I found that my senses doesn't belong to me because that has been colonized by the Western notions of aesthetics. So I began to ask them, who am I? If my senses don't belong to me, then I can't call myself an Indian or whatever. I mean, I also don't have any parochial, that kind of understanding about India. So I am absolutely not a patriot. Because I think every human being, whether they are Americans or Indians, they are all born original. So I don't say that Indians are better or they have a past, and I don't believe in that. Today, every child born is original. And their potential is huge. But we completely... so what I did was that when I realized that I am completely colonized, I started living with rural tribal communities. And since I went there to learn from them, I had no great idea about how to develop them. It was basically to see how do I become myself, because I'm not myself, but they are themselves, because they are not being so colonized by formal education and all those systems. So almost by 10, 12 years, I had a very experimental life. I stopped reading for 12 years, for 7 years. When I stopped reading, I stopped intellectualizing. Like the way you see these old houses where trees began to grow, Similarly, my senses began to function. Because education, and so what I did was that I studied two things. One, I studied what are the cognitive damages of schooling. How fundamentally, and it's not I'm not talking in emotional sense. I have 12 years, almost last few years, I have studied this very, very clearly. What are the cognitive damages of schooling? And parallelly, I also started studying how naturally children learn, or not only children, everything in nature is learning. How is that learning taking place? What is the biological basis for being in the world? Fundamentally, we are all biological beings. We are not intellectual beings. We are biological beings. So I have done few experiments. Later, maybe, when presentation, I can show you my work with potters, my work with children, and I've just started a small project called Reimagining Schools, where, of course, it's going to be failure because the very context for these experiments is not there. It's going to be very, very difficult. But even then, I think it will be very interesting space for people to relook at, the whole impossibility of things,
Why don't you just touch upon it? Because you have different audiences every day.
Can I interrupt you?
Yeah.
When you say there is no law, no system, no law, you open the door for control you. So everyone who have his own influence somewhere, I don't know, profit or something like this, can come and influence on people, on simple people. So we have to have some law. For example, when you grow plant, you have greenhouse. You say for growing you need such a temperature and water. And in this situation, it will grow naturally. I agree with you. It's very important. But we have to understand the situation and the circumstances, and to let the people to grow free, to control themselves. We need law, because if no, the culture will break, will control us.
No, what I would like to say is that, there is this Darwin theory that survival of the fittest. I think it was a complete mistake. And I don't think there is inherent violence in nature. The whole nature is about, it's not about violence. There is a complete system. Like, that is the inner thing, that we are not cruel by nature. For a simple example is that, who teaches children to tell lies? Children inherently doesn't tell lies. But there is no reason to tell lies.
But there are people who destroy the system.
No, so the problem doesn't lie with children. The problem lies with adults and the older people. So we need not go in trouble, put our experiments on children. It is that we who need to change.
It's really striking.
Reimagining schools.
So reimagining schools, basically I looked at what are the dangers of modern education. See, one thing I realized is that when I started observing children, observing biology of cognition, I found that these terminologies are all confusions, like learning and value and all that, because experience itself is learning. There is no separate learning which happens later. So the first thing a child learns actually is to be a mother. Because the child experiences that being a child, and the mother is there. So there is a, and I also realized that, so when you, first harm you do to a child is that when you tell the child that school is where learning happens, then already there is a confusion within the child. And even the very word learning is confusing, because the child is already learning. The moment the child is, let me please finish.
What's the question?
Let me finish, because others are also hearing.
No, I think comments will come later.
Comments, please don't interrupt. So, I lost. Where was I?
No, you said that there's a confusion between saying that.
You see, it's like asking, I spent so many years with the rural tribal communities, and I found that there are so many of these terms that we use, they don't use at all. One fundamental difference I found is that we have more nouns and they have more verbs. Because they are actually process people. For us, even verb is learned as a noun.
For instance.
Any word you take, because we don't do anything. No? You see, and another thing that happens with knowledge is that, knowledge is, first of all, knowledge doesn't reside in words. Knowledge is a wordless experience. It is to communicate is what I need knowledge. When I learn cooking, I don't use words and cook, no? I don't. I do things, I learn about it, and if I want to communicate, I communicate through words. So the biggest damage that schooling has done is that language has become the cognitive tool rather than a communication tool. This is number one. Second thing that they have done is that knowledge has preceded knowing. That before you even go through a process to coming to know, knowledge is first given to you, and then what happens is that your only way of understanding this is through analysis. Now we are all talking about this whole rational linear mindedness, no? Now this is only happening because of this kind of a shift from being in the unknown, because when we are being in the unknown, reasoning doesn't function. But we are open, we are humble, and intuition, and of course reasoning also functions within that context. But the moment knowledge is given to you, that you know, the only way you're understanding that is through reasoning. So in fact, reasoning is what short circuits comprehension. You know, and knowing is something that happens without you even knowing it. So what is happening is, as if modernity has completely confused this whole process called knowing by creating all kinds of words that are actually not there. So I'm just putting more and more confusion to people, so that a certainty is what.
Thank you for that.
Actually, certainty. See, if you look at what happens to modern minds, that they are very certain, because 15-20 years we are always dealing with certain knowledge, and what we are doing is we are memorizing it and we are analyzing it. These are the two skills that we have, that we can memorize and we can analyze. But we don't have creativity, we don't have openness, we are afraid of unknown. And what happens is that in 15 years, there is a rewiring of the way our brain functions. So naturally, we have completely trapped in reasoning and that kind of a situation. And again, so because of that, see, this is the problem now, right now we are encountering, that we are into a linear rational mindset, trying to understand holistic thing, which is not possible.
That's true.
Because to understand holistic processes, you need to have holistic way of understanding it. This is the trap that we are in. Any kind of, so because of that, now to a rational mind, there are more subjects. Integration means you add art, you add this, and then it becomes integrated. The issue is that actually we are born holistic. We are born integrated. The world outside is integrated and it is holistic. And if you leave the child alone, the child engages with it and understands it. Not the way we think understanding takes place. It's not through a rational process. But being in the world, engaging with the senses, understanding through the process of self-organization.
Yeah.
It's not through rational understanding that you first language, if you try to analyze, it's not that rationally we have understood it. It happened. Again, culture is not something that we do, but it happens. Sorry, I took...
No, but that was very important.
There was a very interesting experiment. An Indian company placed a computer in the poorest school of the poorest state. I think it was Gujarat.
No, here. It's here.
And they gave no instructions
It's in
at
Delhi.
all.
It's in Delhi.
And within half an hour, the children were operating it and writing their own names in Hindi.
Yeah.
No instruction at all. I'd just like to mention that I have an article from a journal in the States about Finland. Finland has the highest educational standards in Europe. And what they found is that they'd done away with accountability. They had given more time for play so that the children actually learned as they played. And many of our children don't know how to play. I just spent Christmas with my 3 grandchildren. All the time they're on text, not playing, they're on a text. And they're not talking to each other at all. It's frightening. And I could pass this on, but it's quite a long article, but it shows how that the Finnish educational system has done away with exams. They have one exam, that's the end of the 12th year, the high school. The teacher works with the children, they learn as they go, and then they have an exam to go on to wherever they need to go on. It's fascinating that...
Actually, this play itself is a confusion,
Yeah.
Play is the way children learn. There is no playway method. That's again, we are confusing the whole thing. Play is the way you look at any animal child. It is learning through the act of play. In fact, I have actually almost 20 years of documentation on children. So I'm not just telling from any, out of my mind. I have 20 years, I have documented how children do various things. And, if there's an opportunity, I can show you just on play. That how actually children understand form, function and relationship through various play they do. But this play has to be completely autonomous. If an adult is trying to manage the play, it will kill it. Children have to be completely free to understand the world.
Would you like to share your experiment which is going on with Sadhana with the school? That will be good.
Well, she's saying not now, but in general.
Yeah, you can just mention that project.
Maybe you can you mention it in 1 or 2 minutes?
Yeah. So actually, you can also, I'll tell the blog. There is a blog called reimaginingschools.wordpress.com.
Okay.
And if you look at that, you will see, I've very elaborately, I've looked at what are the damages of schooling, how learning takes place, all those kind of things. So it's a long kind of a blog with, the experiments.
Okay, so that's great.
Reimagining schools. .wordpress.com. Yeah.
WordPress.com.
WordPress. That's a blog, no? WordPress.com.
So, reimagining children.
Reimagining schools.
Reimagining schools.wordpress.com. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
It may be that the Indian culture is more female than it is male. Because the other experiments that have been found is that boy children fight and possess articles. My grandson will take a hammer and hit another child if he tries to take his toy away from him. Girls cooperate and are much more capable of helping one another. And in Finland, it's a female society. Because when the Finns were away fighting the Russians, the women were running society. When the Scandinavians were fighting the English with the what are those Danes that came across? I've forgotten their name. The Danish invaders in Vikings. Sorry, the Vikings left Scandinavia. It was the women that were running society. Therefore, Scandinavia became female, and because they're using female traits like play and cooperation, they're learning quicker.
No, actually, this Ardhanarishwara quality is to be understood. Again, I don't think there is a female and male kind of a... In Indian situation, tribal. See, the moment you become literate, you become more rational. But a non-literate person is more Ardhanarishwara, which means the male and the female principle functions together. So there is no exclusive male and separate female. But it happens when you get into rational kind of a beingness, then your patriarchy and all that kind of society is coming, So I think that it needs to be understood in that.
It's a different concept. What Hofstede is using male and female, he's talking about characteristics. And the characteristics of certain countries are more compassionate. For example, Muslims cry Muharram.
No, it is not the natural. It has been constructed. See, for example, when the moment the child is born in the West, or even I've seen in Pune, that if there is a female child, that child will be taken to a blue room or a yellow room or whatever room they have decided. And so right from the child is born, the genderization is happening. You're dividing the child into, you're making the child aware that gender. Whereas in our tribal societies, this is never done. Both the male and female children will play the same game till they are 12, 15 years. So genderization is the cause for this kind of separation. It's not by nature we are male and female, we are integrated.
I agree with that. Yes. Yeah, sure.
A couple of quick comments. Actually, I was noting even in this discussion, there is the rational analysis way, and there is the other way, and even the other discussion that was happening about law. It's quite intriguing how some of the theological assumptions are actually very, very deep. So when you're saying the child is born whole, and there's an argument about law is needed, we're actually talking at a very deep theological level, where in the Indian system you say you are enlightened naturally, and where you're saying, man is a sinner as he is born, and therefore law is needed. And the same thing is happening with text versus non-text learning, whereas you have this theological underpinning of the text being supreme, and then you put analysis on top of it, versus the other way of learning. So it's part of the nature of colonization also that we are experiencing is not only have we you've taken this particular way, but we've taken a way which is actually dramatically opposite to the way that our natural systems were flowing. And we're, in some senses, our secular education is making us Christian.
Precisely.
Yeah.
This is the point.
In the way we learn.
Yeah.
The other thing that I wanted to back you up on is that theological colleges
Yes.
are not there to learn about truth. They're there to conform you to be acceptable to go out and pastor a church.
That's right.
So you've got to be theologically approved by having passed through a certain, and you cannot question those standards, especially in America.
Right.
You cannot question that.
That's
Whereas in the Asian African context, you had a teacher, guru, somebody who had a group of students and they wandered around the Old Testament. They wandered around with a senior, older, wiser person, and they imbibed that wisdom together as a family, sitting under a tree or in a house. There was no exam, there was no system to pass or fail. You just grew and matured, and you were given responsibility when the community recognized it.
So, can I make a few comments before we close? I'd just like to elaborate a little more on a word that was used a little while ago, and that was the word anthropology. The word itself is problematic, and I'm saying it while I'm a visiting research fellow for anthropology at Queen's University in Belfast. So I am in that department, but the word is problematic because it's a construct of colonization. It's a word which says we want to study cultures and people and the way they behave, and that is anthropology, the study of peoples and cultures, whereas we are a blank whiteboard and everybody is subjected to study against who can't be studied. So there's one which is immune, and everybody else is studied in that context as exotic, odd, queer, interesting, etc. Ethnic, tribal, etc. So even the word tribal is problematic, So there are a lot of... Now here is the idea of how a word which should be used just for communicating the truth becomes a tool of psychological management and again oppressing a mass psychology or managing a mass psychology. And actually education, colonization, dynamics is all about how one manages the other's psychology, really. It's the whole thing is a play of human psychology. And that's why when you're talking about education culture today, I would say to keep the word or even the thought about how we are playing with psychologies through culture, through education, through local context, through so-called global context, is something which is underpinning everything.
Word like bottom of the pyramid is that underprivileged.
There's a lot of. I mean, even the idea of
developed.
I think even the idea of developed and underdeveloped nations came in only in 1954. There was nobody who was developed and underdeveloped before that. So just calling somebody developed and somebody underdeveloped, automatically the idea that which can be seen in print is superior to that which is just said in word, that itself is a completely warped idea and has completely changed how the world looks at itself. And that's why the printing press did what it did to the Indian mind. They just abandoned thousands of years of knowledge as not valid because it was not in print. Or that which was in print was burnt like a bonfire by invaders. Do you know that? They took books from Takshila, was it, or Nalanda? I think Takshila. They took all the, fantastic literature of the past. Not just literature as in philosophy, scientific literature, mathematical literature, physics and chemistry and everything. They took that whole lot and they burnt all the books, and that bonfire burnt day and night for 3 days and 3 nights. So it's not a illiterate culture that we are talking about. The second thing I'd like to say when we are talking about local and global contexts of education, also some time back we were talking about multiple intelligence and so on. Now, I just want to mention briefly here that we can call it the Vedic way of education, but it was not just the Vedic way. Basically, if you look at how knowledge is woven and given to us from the past, and it was not always through a text. For years and years, there was no text. It just came from generation to generation. How was it taught, and how was multiple intelligence used in education? And that's where you get in the cultural, scientific, sensory context, all integrally united. And here also, I'd just like to mention that the word integration is different from the word integral. People say integrated knowledge is integral knowledge. It's not integral knowledge. Integral is that which flows like the rays of the sun. The sun is here, everything is there, and everything gets connected like the rays of the sun and nourishes everything like the rays of the sun. So that's integral. Integrated is when you have something there, you have something there, and you try to join them. That's different. So in our culture, and I'm talking from the Indic perspective, everything was woven into beat, music, or intonation, rhyme, sensory communication, not just reading, right? And a lot of time for repetitive assimilation by the senses, by sound, and so on, by movement, and then re-expressed. Now, I was conducting a workshop just a couple of weeks ago, and I said, how do you complete the process of learning unless you are absorbing, assimilating, and re-expressing simultaneously? You can't say, okay, we teach in snippets. We have half an hour of one class and half an hour of another class, and you plant mathematics onto the student's mind, and you give them a little time to assimilate, and that's it. And then after 10 days, we'll have a re-expression test. And that's called formative assessment now. But that's a warped idea of formative assessment. Because that's not formative. Formative means that which is spontaneously happening immediately. So if a person is naturally understanding, assimilating something, and naturally expressing something, that is where formative assessment happens. Not when you say, okay, now instead of 3 months, we are going to test you or judge you in 10 days, and so we are doing formative assessment. It's just an eyewash, right? So I just wanted to share some of these ideas because I really think that if we are really looking at going into natural ways, then we really need to revisit the idea of intellectualizing naturalness or natural ways, because I think we're doing more harm than good in trying to change the cover but not change the substance of our mindset. So I think with that, I talk too much, I'm sorry. But but I think we close now because it's 7. We must go. Dr. Sonal Man Singh will be beginning her performance now. I think it's been a very, very interesting interaction with many points of view, and I hope we have even more heightened, excited, enthusiastic interactions tomorrow. Tomorrow is my full-day workshop. Starts at 9 to 5, and then we have 5 to 6:30, a very, very interesting plenary tomorrow. So look forward to seeing you there, and the other announcements will be made tomorrow. All right? Remember that Mr. Sam Pitroda, not only is he the chief advisor to the Prime Minister of India, He's an extremely interesting, multifaceted personality, also an artist and many other things, and he's a great speaker. He's speaking at the Habitat Center at 5:30 on the 14th, followed by a fantastic performance by Tanushree Shankar. And then we have a VIP dinner for those who want to attend it. So thank you very much, and see you outside.